Welcome to Canine Code Puppy Class number 4. Today I want to talk about a difficult topic. The topic of what do we do to train a dog not to do something. There's something called learning by consequence. So that basically just means, did I get a good outcome or a bad outcome? Today I'll be talking about how to respond to your dog's behavior with negative aversive consequences. The main mistake that people make when they correct their dog's behavior is they don't create a consequence that's negative enough to have lasting effect. I like to imagine a scale of 1 to 10 measuring the impact that the consequence has on the dog. 10 would be traumatizing. We never operate there. 1 would be completely insignificant and changing nothing at all, perhaps just distracting the dog from its behavior. 2 would be mild, 3 would be moderate. Most people operate down the bottom of the scale, creating consequences that only have an impact of somewhere between 1, 2, and 3. This means that while the dog is perhaps chewing their shoelaces, they'll go, ah! And it interrupts the dog in its behavior, but the dog has no reason not to go back to doing it again. And so it's back at it after only a few seconds. When the dog then goes back to do the same behavior again, chewing the shoelaces, and the owner goes, ah! Again, it doesn't have the same shock factor as it did the first time. Because now the dog has heard it before, and by the 3rd and 4th and 5th time that it happens, the dog has gotten used to it. At that point, you'll have no other choice but to up your negative consequence and make something a little bit harsher again, and harsher again, and harsher again, as the dog, unfortunately, gradually gets used to next level, and the next level again. Don't make that mistake. Let's look at a different example. What if you gave a correction with the impact of 7 to 8? Remember, 10 was traumatizing, 9 is harsh. Never operate at 9 either, but I sometimes do as a professional dog trainer. However, only when I feel it's justified, because I'm trying to guarantee the dog's safety, another dog's safety, or a person's safety. So we'll put 9 aside for professionals, 8 was strong, and 7 was assertive. If you give a correction with impact on the dog of 7 to 8, it should look something like, wow! And you'll be able to see how the moment stays with the dog for quite a few seconds, if not more than a minute. You can see it in its eyes, and it might even slink off to a place where it feels safer, like its bed or under a piece of furniture. And don't distract the dog while it's still processing what happened. Leave it time to store it in the brain and remember it for the future. So don't distract, don't laugh, don't try to undo anything. Just leave the dog to process what happened. You don't want to give a correction and then rob it from the opportunity to learn from the consequence. Good. So after giving a correction like that, at a level 7 to 8 out of 10, assertive to strong, definitely significant and memorable, you'll find it takes a lot longer before they would have the guts to, for example, come and touch your shoelaces again. If at all they forget and they come back to doing it again, and you give that correction a second time, this time, even if you did it at exactly the same intensity as the first time, your dog would actually react not less but more from the situation. And I'll tell you why. It's because now it has a bad memory attached. So its current experience plus 1 bad memory. If at all it was to happen the third time, your dog would react even stronger again, because now its current situation plus 2 bad memories. This means that if you kept giving the same correction at the same level, you would eventually get an effect that was 9 and perhaps even 10. So you can't do that either. But what you can do, and this is where it gets good, is if you give a correction the first time, making sure it's enough to have an assertive to strong impact on your dog, then the next time you're going to do just, say, 80% of the same strength or intensity in the correction. You'll get out of your own head. Don't have any preconception of what it takes to get the dog up to a 7 or an 8. In the very moment, just watch the dog's reaction and ask yourself, is this a 7 or 8 yet? So if I was tapping on his toes, I would put my foot on his toe and I would just press down right until I felt that I was getting a 7 to 8 reaction. I will have noticed afterwards that I probably only did about 80%. The next time, if it happens again, then I'll be able to do only 40 to 60% and then 20%. And in the end, before I can even put my foot on his toes, he's already out of here because he's learned his lesson. And from then on, the behavior actually stops for good. If your correction is strong enough, so 7 to 8 out of 10, then it shouldn't take you more than absolute maximum 4 or 5 repeats of the same correction before the behavior is permanently corrected, provided that you were using good timing. If by mistake you accidentally give your puppy a correction that's too harsh, let's just say you're walking down the hallway and your puppy playfully runs after you, bites onto your pants and gets under your feet, and you accidentally step on their tail. Although they might react with and running off and cowering, and I know it would be tempting to go and comfort them, I advise that you don't. Even when the correction was accidentally too harsh, give them an opportunity to learn from it. So don't undo anything, just let them process what just happened, and then they'll stay away from your feet in the future. If you give a correction at around 4, 5, or 6 out of 10, you'll find that it works momentarily for a little while. It could be 3 days, 3 weeks, or 3 hours sometimes only. But then it wouldn't work anymore. And so be careful that your dog isn't just somewhat reacting, but not quite how I demonstrated it, because it won't be enough in the long run. Now here's some good news. There are things that you can do straight after providing a negative consequence to your dog's behavior that will either boost or lessen their memory of how bad that event was. Most people, without even thinking about it, laugh straight after giving a correction, especially if they're watching someone else do it. Most corrections don't actually hurt the puppy physically. They're more about shock factor. And so if someone laughs, the puppy will quite easily think that it was all just part of the game, and that perhaps it was even you upping the game. For example, if I tapped him on the toes and then everyone laughed, he would go, "Oh, is that your new trick? Well, watch what I can do," and he'll fly straight back at me trying to play bite on my toes. So rule number 1 is don't let anyone in the room laugh at your puppy just after giving it a correction. Number 2 is don't try to comfort your dog either, because you want them to really wallow in the pity of what just happened, so that it makes a memorable moment and has lasting effect. Also, don't reward your dog for stopping the bad behavior. I don't kiss my husband for not kicking me. And in the same way, I don't reward my dog for stopping bullying me. And they absolutely know that when they're attacking my feet, they're teasing me, they're trying to provoke me. They don't get bribed to stop doing that. It's something I demand. And it has a negative consequence if they won't listen to me. Some people simply hate the negative energy that lingers in the air straight after a punishment, and therefore very quickly let themselves get distracted and move on to the next thing, just to sort of get away from the bad moment. I want you to do the opposite. I want you to wallow in it with the dog. So straight after a correction, I follow it up with a teacher's finger up in the air. Don't reach it out towards the dog because that looks as if you're trying to reach them. Keep it up near your shoulder, in your own space, and look at them like, I wouldn't do that again if I was you. Trust me. Be my guest. But I am prepared to give this correction for as many times as it takes. This is a hard boundary for me. I've got all the energy and time in the world to stand up for it. With that kind of eyeballing, you don't have to say all that, but I'd like you to think it and I'd like you to let it exude from your eyes. Because if you are that assertive about your boundary and you take it that seriously, then your puppy will take you seriously too. And then they won't come back and attack your feet so much in the future, and you won't have to give correction after correction after correction for attacking your feet over and over again. When you eyeball, your dog will first be looking at you with a question mark in their eyes, a little bit like, do you mean that? Are you serious? And then if you keep eyeballing them, then their question mark will go, uh-oh, she looks serious. You can kind of feel their whole energy drop back as they might start squinty blinking. Maybe you'll get a lick of the lips, and if they're a little bit cheeky, they'll do a short glance away and then back, and there's still a question mark. If that happens, hold the eye contact right until they go, and do a big head turn. And you can see that sometimes they even sit down or drop at this point. You can see that they've backed off. Make sure that you hold the eye contact right up until that moment, because otherwise, if you walk away or look away, then your dog will think that you backed off, that they eyeballed you out of the standoff. When you create a negative consequence, there are a few guidelines to follow. Firstly, the consequence must always happen while the dog is still doing the unwanted behavior. Never later, never 2 hours after. I don't care if they've chewed up your speedboat or what they've done. They cannot know that you are angry because they destroyed that thing. They might have learned from previous experiences that you sometimes get really angry when you come home, but they don't see the link, even if you're pointing at your speedboat or waving a destroyed cushion in the air. They just know that when you do that, then it could get nasty for them. You can't risk giving a dog a correction without knowing why it's being corrected. It would be very, very cruel, because from then on, they'll feel like they never know when something's going to fall from the sky, and they'll start walking around on eggshells and not trusting that it's safe to be around you anymore, and then you have actually mentally harmed them. So many people express to me that they're really scared of accidentally creating a consequence that's too harsh to some of their puppies' behaviors, but in fact, it would be very difficult to give a negative consequence so strong that you ruin your puppy psychologically. You'd almost have to be doing it deliberately to go to that level, whereas it is not at all hard to destroy a dog's mental well-being by giving corrections at times when it doesn't know why it happened. So I want you to be really vigilant with yourself of never correcting your puppy unless you are absolutely 100% sure that your puppy knows exactly why that happened. Even better than correcting your dog just while it's doing it would be to correct your dog instantly when it starts the negative or the unwanted behavior. Let's say I come home and my dog has torn up a cushion. I can't react now because my dog is greeting me at the door and is no longer destroying the cushion. So what I would do is I would leave the cushion where it is and ignore it entirely until I see my dog wander back and continue destroying the cushion, and boom, I'm ready straight away to create a negative consequence to that. I know that some of you right now will be thinking, but what kind of consequence? Don't worry, I'll get to that section in a bit. If you correct your dog instantly when it starts a new unwanted behavior, then your dog will be in no doubt of why that consequence happened. Another guideline is to always take physical action. Dogs don't have a verbal language, although they use noise to express energies, or it isn't actually words. And yes, I know you can teach a dog a word, but it isn't their natural language. Instead, if a dog doesn't want something to happen, then it usually takes action. It moves its body. So if you're trying to tell your dog with words what not to do, but you're not moving its body, then no wonder if your dog doesn't take you seriously. So I always try to do something. Push, grab, block, hold. Somehow I squeeze something. I do something that is a physical action that creates a negative consequence of the dog's behavior. When you create a negative consequence, be very careful that you're not stuck in some sort of preconception of what will create how much impact on your dog. You'll get it wrong because what really matters is what does your dog think. So while you're creating a negative consequence, while you're giving a correction, really look at your dog and keep scanning from 1 to 10. Where's my puppy at? Where's my puppy at? In that way, you'll make sure that in this very moment, in this very situation, administered by this person, the dog was experienced a negative consequence at level 7 to 8. It'll be different from day to day, from dog to dog, from person to person, from context to context. So therefore, the only thing you can hang on to is how is the dog reacting right now. Whether to use negative consequences and corrections or not is a very personal choice, and I want you to make your own. I'm very well aware that there's a whole school of thought called positive reinforcement training that works very hard to eliminate all negative consequences from their training. I also know that the enthusiasts of this positive training are very loud on the internet and very quick to call it cruel when you create a negative consequence. I have a very different way of thinking about it, especially after watching dogs playing in the dog park or at doggy daycare and seeing that within their relationships there's a lot of negative consequence giving. If you're in doubt, look up how bitches interact with their puppies on YouTube clips and you'll see that even the little cute Cavalier mother has a very assertive way of keeping her puppies in line. For me, it's important that my puppy understands me. And believing that negative consequences are part of natural relationship dynamics, I choose to use them. It pains me to see puppies as young as 12 weeks old develop into little tyrants that are not actually fun to live with. I want every one of you to have the most beautiful, respectful, and connected relationship with your dogs. And I believe that that happens best with setting boundaries and generating respect. If you don't have enough respect for yourself to set boundaries around your physical well-being, then why would your puppy respect them? So let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What kind of negative consequences do I use? Well, one of the absolute classic go-tos would be sin binning. So sin binning means separating your dog from you. That in itself is never pleasant for your dog, especially not if it happens with a sense of being evicted. In nature, it's really important for the puppy to have the acceptance of the pack, and to be evicted from that is serious business. You can use that to your advantage by setting a rule that says, if you bully me or misbehave in my den, then you get evicted until you've calmed down and you're prepared to come back on your best behavior. You can sin bin your dog by putting them outside in the garden, putting them in a separate room, or even putting them back in their pen. I know that generally we don't want to in any way create a negative experience from being in the pen or in the garden or in their crate in particular, but I find that it actually works the same as when my parents sent me to my room when I was a kid. It was terrible to be sent to my room, and yet it never even occurred to me to hate my room for that reason. There is one little thing though that I've got to point out. The smaller the space you put your dog into when you sin bin them, the more threatening it seems to be evicted to that space. So if I want to put my dog into a crate because it's misbehaving in the house, I do it with a matter-of-factly energy, but not at all a scary energy. Whereas if I wanted to put them in the garden as a negative consequence, then I could afford to be much more gruff. Oh, come here! Oh, grab them by the collar and put them out a little bit like an old grumpy grandpa. Just to underline my offense at what they've done. And that will be perfectly fine because I'm putting them outside in a large space. So adjust your gruffness according to how small or how big the area of the sin binning is. Another tool, which you may already have seen on several different TV shows, is the classic metal shaker. So you typically take a cookie tin or a tea tin, best to get an old one from the op shop that's a better quality than the modern ones you get in the supermarket, and put either nails or pebbles, or what I use is overseas coins inside them, tape it up, and it makes a terrible clanging sound when you shake it. The box will have more effect if you hold it in your fingertips and really let it clang rather than hugging it tight with the palm of your hand. It's important that you get a ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching sound. The shaker tin is particularly good for things that happen on a distance. It could be digging in the garden, or it could, for example, be barking in the car. Obviously, while you're driving, you can't even turn around and look at your dog, and that's where a shaker tin can be very handy. Sometimes I use a water bottle to squirt my dog with water. Some dogs don't really care about that, so it's important to use a squirt bottle that gives a strong enough squirt to reach the 7 to 8. You can't just use a little water pistol or a evaporizer. Instead, I recommend using a disposable water drink bottle where you pull up the pop-up top, fill it up full. You could even put it in the fridge first, and then you'll put it somewhere where you know you might need it. Could, for example, be you walking out of the door in the morning and you know your dog is going to jump on you, or hang onto your morning robe and pull at it. At that point, you've put your bottle in place already. Grab the bottle and go or whatever it takes to get the impact of 7 to 8 out of 10. Really go for it, especially if you have a dog like a Labrador or a Groodle or some other dog that generally likes to play with water. As I said before, one of the guidelines to giving a good negative consequence that will have lasting effect is to take physical action. Sometimes I don't have a shaker tin or a water squirt bottle to use, so I'll need to do something myself physically. I'm going to give a few examples. One, of course, as I mentioned, was attacking my feet. At that, I'll typically tap them on their toes. I sometimes also use tapping on the toes when they're walking into a forbidden area. If my dog is jumping on me, I'll typically put my knee up, and if they're very boisterous and really jumping onto me, then they might even get a little bit of a knee bump in the chest. Always following up with eyeballing. If they're mouthing my hands, put the fingers down the throat, or even just a loose hand into their mouth. Sometimes I've seen dogs jump up and nip at the side of the leg to get attention. At that, I'm not averse to just giving them a little push with my leg, not kicking them, but just, I call it a donkey heel, just in their side, and then follow up with your look. In that way, often that little habit can be killed within a few seconds. If a dog is humping on me, then I go to the nearest wall and I squeeze my leg up against the wall right until the dog simply has to let go of its grip. It might be a controversial point, but one thing I'm passionate about helping you to understand is that it isn't what you do, but how harshly you do it that counts. Dogs aren't born with a preconception of whether being told off verbally or getting a shock from an electrical collar is worse than the other. The only thing that matters is how harshly was that correction given. You might think, oh, surely you couldn't even traumatize a dog with screaming if you tried, and surely a dog would get traumatized by an electric shock. But in reality, those collars can be put to such a mild level where it's really only equivalent to a little nip with the nails like that on your skin. Not enough for many dogs to even care about that. Whereas if I stood rah, 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 screaming at a dog's face like that over and over again, I'm pretty sure it would get traumatized. So hang on to that it isn't what you do, but how harshly you do it. It's really important for me when you create negative consequences that you do it with a lot of mindfulness and presence. It's not something that I take haphazardly. It's something that you and I need to be very, very serious and very, very good at. In the same breath, it's important for me that you don't let your children correct your dog with anything that is physically aversive to your puppy. Children don't have enough presence and focus and coordination to do it properly. It is, however, perfectly fine that you step in and create negative consequences on your children's behalf. That doesn't detract anything from your child, but it does boost your status in the pack as the peacekeeper. Just like if you have several children and one's bullying the other, you wouldn't just go, well, kick him back harder. You would step in and say, oi, I don't allow this kind of behavior in my pack. And in this house, we follow my rules. If you're finding yourself in situations where you are smacking your dog or kicking them with your leg, then it's probably time to just, step back and ask yourself, is that necessary? Have you in fact failed to build up enough respect that that kind of behavior is not necessary? If you're not sure how to build up more respect, don't worry, all that information is coming in video number 5. Now, I'm just going to give you a little bit of technique about how to eyeball really well. When you eyeball, don't get all stroppy and reaching out towards your dog and all your energy is kind of coming up here and you're letting it out of your mouth, talking to your dog. Don't do this, don't do that. because you actually look as if there's a question mark in your eyes, as if you don't really quite believe it yourself. Instead, get back, shoulders over your heel, relaxed body, but firm eyes. Pull your finger back into your own space. Now what this says is, I haven't become chaotic. I am absolutely in control of my own body, and that makes me a lot more dangerous than if I had lost my cool.